Hi everyone, and welcome back to Writing 201. This will be the last class for this course, in which we will focus on whether or not you have to be an avid reader and also emotional weight. So why should you be or should you not be an avid reader in order to be a good storyteller? I'm not talking about success. I'm not talking about financial gain. I'm talking about being good at what you're practicing. Because that's really the mentality you should have. That no matter how many books you write, no matter how long you're going at it, you're still practicing it. You may get to a point where you're extremely confident and you have either read a lot of books or you've lived a rich life, so your richness in what you include in your writing evolves over time. But what doesn't change is that as a human being, you're supposed to be, or hopefully, learning about yourself and life, and have a sense of humility in the sense that because you're not the only person out there doing that art form, that you're never really going to be I would say at the top of your game in terms of like, okay, I've peaked, this is where it stops. Even if your readers see it that way and you feel that you are continuing to evolve as an author, you yourself should have not just a sense of humility but also a sense of wonder on the aspect of not just challenging yourself in different themes, but even like revisiting themes and trying to either do them again in a different angle, or even maybe just doing it again but having a different premise in the story that you're going to write in that theme. So what does that all have to do with whether or not you should be reading books? Well, firstly, I did talk about this on TikTok, so feel free to look that up and have a listen. But for here, I want to get more focused on how it affects your writing. First off, let's say that it's the opposite, where you don't like to read, or it's been a really long time and you lost your passion for reading, and that it was more of something you did in the innocence of the stage in your life when you were a kid, where when you were a kid your parents made sure that you read books so that you were a literate person, and maybe even you just chose to read yourself through your own volition, your own free will. But there are people out there that as adults, that's not something that interests them, but they're still creative. They're still interested in the craft itself. They still want to tell stories. They just don't want to consume it. And they could have many reasons for that. It could be because it sounds like a very dull pastime or hobby that obligates them to focus and sit down and consume something that requires not only imagination and a certain way of thinking and digesting what they're entertaining themselves with, and it could just be something that you just it's taxing on you, especially if you're a family person and you have so many responsibilities and people to look after, and then you end up neglecting your own self, or you know how valuable your time is for time to yourself, that the idea of picking up something physical that involves information, or at least a certain level of energy to incorporate imagination in terms of whatever that author didn't include in the narrative. Because some books don't have that like 75% of work they do for you to paint the picture. Some do the opposite. Some give very little visual understanding of what you're consuming. If you're that kind of author, or you know those kinds of authors, the thing that they will find difficult, or at least doesn't come off as natural in their style of storytelling, is their understanding of why people read. That's the big question. Why do people read? Why do people even consume storytelling in general? There's so many forms now of storytelling, and it's a question of why is that actually still an interest? Sure, there's that frightening thing that all authors feel now, especially with AI writers becoming more advanced and audiobooks becoming a bigger deal, that it will make them seem smaller or skipped over, especially if publishers cheap out and start creating several AI authors. And that the entertainment industry, i.e. anything on screen, becomes so overwhelming, so easy to access, that the idea of someone picking up something physical seems impossible. But here's the thing. People still want to feel a human connection to something fictional, because there's a sense of control and a sense of safety when they consume that, because it's their opportunity, it's their space to indulge in something that doesn't involve any responsibility and will actually help them, I guess, put less stress on themselves. And that's why it puzzles me when I hear authors saying that they don't like reading. It's like, then how do you know what your readers like? How do you know what you like? How do you know what you like in terms of storytelling? That's just weird. Now let's go on the opposite side. The one that I'm on, and I hope that you guys are. I love reading. Okay? It's something that I stopped doing for many years when I was just starting out. I actually was... It was a headache for me to read. But once I had to go back to school and finish my bachelor's, and I had to actually read books for certain classes that involved essentially like a high school thing where you had to do a book report kind of thing. It actually made me want to read again. Not quickly, like it did take some time for me to get the gears going and actually be able to pay attention to what I'm reading, but it sparked an old flame and even made it bigger, because the thing about reading anything, even nonfiction, is that it is still a parallel to your reality that you choose to believe in, and even sometimes try to control difficult circumstances. Sometimes the difficult circumstances control us, control our reality, because it is something that forces us to either submit to the reality that we have, or challenge us to change that reality. And what reading really does, in terms of how it shapes who we are as writers, is asking ourselves, what did this book mean to me? How did I feel when I was done reading it? How did I feel as a person? I mean, it's just... it's hard to picture yourself in the reader's shoes unless you're a reader yourself. That's really the summary of this. Because if you're a writer and you've either never read a book or it's been a while, the only thing you have really is your technical understanding of the craft. You can go to school to up to the PhD level for creative writing, and you can have a wizard-like understanding of how the craft is supposed to be mastered, technically speaking. But having a technical understanding and technical mastery is not the same as a practiced mastery and a passion for reading stories. Because reading a story and really looking forward to it is you understanding what we look for in a story. How you're able to find the human aspect in storytelling. Even if your reasoning for reading stories is to completely distract yourself from reality. But if what you're so engrossed in is so captivating to you, that means that it did connect with you on a human level. So even if it doesn't really register with you that you got anything philosophical out of it, right, or you even learned anything about yourself, you still found something pleasurable about what you just read. And it doesn't mean that every book you read will have that philosophical, life-changing feeling. It's still something that you can translate yourself, if you're a writer, to others, where you're on both sides, is what I'm trying to say. So that's pretty much it. There's not much really to it, to answering that question, other than yes, you should be reading books in order to be a good writer. But let's move on to emotional weight. Now, I kind of went to great lengths talking about this on TikTok, so again, feel free to go and look at that yourselves. I can send you a link if it takes too long to root around all the videos I post on there. But let me get to it. Let me get to the meat of this. Emotional weight. I don't really read modern day books. The oldest I'll ever read a book is in the early 2000s. Reason being is that whenever I'm in a grocery store or a chain bookstore and I just pick up randomly any book that seems new, and I just kind of skim the first page, I don't really have any interest, because there's something about modern books, especially books that take place in a current timeline, that just feels a bit stilted, a bit too black and white. And it's not that I'm trying to put other authors down, it's more like because I don't really take the chance to read other authors' work. For my own research and understanding of storytelling, books from the 80s and 90s or older than that is a time where emotional weight was prominent. That's the thing. It's more prominent in older generations, because in those times there was less distraction, less lenience towards complacency in comfort, where we're in an age where everything is so accessible. There's no hiding anything. There's no difficulty taking whatever we want, and that includes information. I'm not just talking about literally physical things you can buy, but like how we're introduced to the world's news and even propaganda, new things to buy, all that kind of stuff. It's hard to really give your readers a reason to pause when they're reading the book. That's the big one. If you read any old book, there's a lot of weight in there in terms of how the characters speak, how they act, and how much the author is asking the characters to rely on their wit and intelligence. So even if a character is deemed stupid or lesser capable than other characters to defend themselves in peril, that's still very gratifying, because they're still tested, but the result of their test varies, and it can even make their lesser intelligence or lesser volume in life experience that will actually bring out the reality of how capable they are to not only transform as a person, but how they can transform in terms of how they carry the story forward. They may have zero impact on the story, but as a reader, you're actually grateful that the author showed this person for who they really are, and who the author wanted them to be in terms of how big of a part in the story as it goes along. That's getting harder and harder to see nowadays, and it's not that I'm being obnoxious and saying, only me, I'm the best one in the world. No, I'm just saying, in terms of me learning about the craft of storytelling, I have a clearer understanding of how to implement emotional weight through old books. Because in old books, the authors, whether they were writing in the current timeline of their life or older than their time, you get this extremely earthy feeling, as if there was never going to be an evolution in technology that would limit how easy it would be for a character to get out of a situation that they can't get out of. Like, even if that person or character is poor, and let's say they get kidnapped. If they were from our generation, and I'm talking like YouTube, what if that character was young and had watched so many YouTube videos on how to get out of a kidnapping situation and use their wit that way? And that's still vaguely interesting, but what if those kinds of streaming services or software or anything to do with the internet didn't exist? How hard would it have to work to get out of that situation? Now, what if there was a high level of technology, but you wrote the story in a way that still feels limiting to the characters, where depending on their class, they're limited to what they can afford in terms of technology, and therefore they become the wittier ones that may survive an apocalypse or something. That's what I'm trying to get to here. Reading and emotional weight go hand in hand, because when you read any book of any generation, you see different people's perspectives in terms of their understanding of being human, their understanding of how they try to bridge fiction and reality. All that is extremely important. Reading is extremely valuable, and how you paint emotional weight is extremely valuable. The best way I can summarize emotional weight is essentially crafting your ability to make the reader not only pause at certain points of your story, but give your character pause, where it's almost like you're actually able to freeze time or take a snapshot of what's going on in the story, and that in that snapshot, in that period where everything feels kind of motionless or quiet. You're really asking your character, what are you going to do? Are you going to backpedal? Are you going to go forward? Are you going to go zigzag? Are you going to deceive? What are you going to do? What kind of person are you? I mean, that's the kind of stuff to me that always slows the story down for me. Even if there is a very high pace in what I'm consuming, if there is a certain paralyzing feeling in the character where they have to decide based on fight or flight how they're going to get out of the situation, regardless of how long that will take, that's the good stuff. I mean, when you have, let's say, a regular dialogue between two characters, it's not going to really grab the reader unless there's a bit of tension. You can escalate it however you want, but if you have breathers, but you still want there to be enough tension to keep the reader interested, it's all about not just how friendly they are to each other, but also how their discussion will affect their relationship further in the story or separate them. And that still involves emotional weight. There may not have been a real focus on that, but there was the opportunity to test how heavy are you going in that scenario. Did you have to go heavy or did you have to go light? Did it have great importance to the story, or was it just the story just started, I don't have to really get that heavy right now? But there has to be this snowball effect where you start light and then you're like, okay, these two characters are doing well dynamically and I want to keep that going, but I have to let them do their thing on their own and then come back together and then create either more tension or more intimacy. And that's all on you. You decide how you want to do that. But involving emotional weight is the key thing I want you to take away from this and understand what that is. So in summary, make sure you read books. And when I say read avidly, I don't mean every day. I just mean read more than one book and from more than one author. Secondly, emotional weight is essentially how you present your character's psyche and how they will use their emotions, or how you will, I guess, puppet their emotions to carry the story forward, and how you will get the reader to slow down their own mind as they're reading your book. Because if a reader is just like speed reading your book, they're not really, I mean, they're comprehending what you're writing, but they're not really savoring it. You want them to savor every color that you introduce to your characters. So that sums up this course. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a third level. I'd like to, but for the time being, this is the end of Writing 201. I hope that you found everything I said entertaining and educational. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask me on my social media. And be sure to pick up Wasp Oil on Amazon, either as a Kindle or paperback. Alright. Happy reading. Have a good day. And see you next time.